Thank you very much. Actually, I am at 28 years now. That's fine. Just makes me feel younger when you say 25. Um, I am happy to address questions before, during, after. If you want to email me directly, krichardson@invidi.com or at KHR_UX on Twitter. And don't be fooled by the product management title. In this job I have now at INVIDI, am the company's first UX person. And of course, there was no UX title, so they made one up within the product management organization. So I get the longest business card, which is good for me. Okay. Questions during, please feel free to interrupt me. If you don't interrupt me, I tend to become the professor I was at one time, and I will just talk until you are all asleep. So keep me honest. A friend of mine posted this on Twitter recently. Boundaries are usually pretty interesting places, and that got me thinking. Boundaries are all around us. They can be natural, like the boundary between the stream and the forest, or between the river and the bank. They can be artificial, like the transition between the stages in a triathlon. And they can be hilarious, like the transition between two motorcycles at a MotoGP race. That gets laughs every place I show that. And he makes millions of dollars a year. What's common to all of these boundaries, though, is that they all contain an element of tension. It could be visual tension, it could be emotional tension, cognitive tension. They all contain something about them that makes them interesting. And all boundaries tend to contain the most interesting stuff that happens, right? A race is kind of around in a circle, but when they stop to change motorcycles, that's interesting. And our job, our calling as UX professionals is to learn to identify boundaries, to identify these areas of tension so that we can resolve them for our users and our clients. Luckily, though, for us, it is not just general areas of tension that you have to go out and look for. They tend to fall into one of three categories: usability, usefulness, and a third category that I am calling innovation. Now, keep this in mind, because I'm going to stop talking about this for a moment and talk about a specific project that I worked on, but I will come back to this, so think about this for a minute. I was asked by a company called Keysight Technologies, they're a scientific measurement company out in California, to redesign the software that controls their line of atomic force microscopes. Think a regular microscope, but much more expensive. And this is what it looks like. It runs anywhere from 11 to 20 million crowns. It's used primarily in academia, physicists and chemists, although you're seeing it more now in industry. And what it does, not surprisingly, is measure really, really small things. It measures red blood cells. It can even measure the bonds between atoms. It's an insanely cool piece of technology, but using it can be a challenge. It's not like an old microscope where you just look through the eyepiece and turn the knobs. This is controlled by a piece of software that Keysight's marketing department would like you to think looks like this. And it's not that bad. The windows are kind of aligned. Not too much stuff overlaps other stuff. But in fact, if you watch somebody using it, it looks like this. And the reason it's so hard to use is twofold. One, it presents all of the functionality to all of the people all of the time. And second is that it was originally designed around Microsoft's multi-window desktop design language, which means that doing any single task means having lots of open windows. Lots of open windows means lots of overlap, means lots of orphans. What I'd like to do now is take that piece of software as an example and show what it would look like if we redesigned it separately for each of those areas of tension, right? What would this application look like if we were only concerned about usability? Next, if we were only concerned about usability and usefulness. And then finally, innovation. Okay, it's kind of like going back to school. Before I start, can I get a show of hands if you consider yourself an experienced UX person, regardless of your title, right? That doesn't matter. Experienced UX. So we're looking at half the room. The other half is here for the food? All right, good. Usability issues are generally application specific, right? I don't need to know about who the users are, why they're using it, what they're using it for. All I need really is a deep understanding of international standards, of guidelines, and best practices. Readability is an example of a usability issue, right? I need to know when I'm designing a screen, how big should the letters be so that somebody can read it? I don't need to know who you are, why you're there, you know, what your job title is, and why you're using this thing in order to know whether or not the thing is readable, whether it's legible. There's a formula for that. Of those experienced people, who knew there was a formula to know how big? One person, two, three. All right, and you're not lying, you did. You knew this. Cool. Right? I don't need to know anything about you to know that there's a formula to help me determine how large the letters need to be on the screen. If we're looking at a piece of paper at the typical viewing distance of 500 millimeters, something needs to be 0.9 inches or 2.33 millimeters high in order for me to read it, right? That's where the eye chart is, and that's how far down I can actually tell the eye doctor I can see that letter. The problem is, screens have different resolutions. So if I want to figure out how to design a screen that has legible characters, say for a MacBook Pro, I multiply 0.9 times 227, which is the screen resolution in pixels per inch for the MacBook Pro, and that tells me that in order to have that 2.33 millimeter high character, it needs at least 21 pixels. Bigger pixels means you need fewer of them. Crazy Microsoft Surfaces and Super Retina iPads need more of them. More pixels, need more. Okay, so for this, it has lots of usability issues, right? We could go all afternoon talking about, but we're going to focus just on two. The first is the most obvious, and it is the number of individual windows just in the display that the marketing department would like you to think it's so simple, anybody could use it. Even this has multiple things that are just terrible. Second is this less than informative sets, plural, of navigation and iconography. Notice that some windows have or the main application anyway, has navigation and icons. Some windows just have icons. This one over here on my right now has navigation and icons. Some windows don't have either. It's almost like some of them act like their own independent pieces of software, controlled, kinda, by the stuff that runs globally across the top. And we are not even going to talk about all the tabs. All right, so what can we do with this? The first thing I want to do is take the stuff that was global, all that iconography and navigation, and split out from it the stuff that is truly global, the stuff that's on the right-hand side, file, controls, mode, environment, right? True global application stuff. So good, I've put that up there in a place in the global nav area. And then I've taken everything else, which was a mess, and grouped it according to functionality. So now instead of having lots of icons and navigation up there, we're grouped by function 1, function 2, 3, 4. Right. So things are a little bit tidier. Next, I took that image window because it was on the bottom right, and it seemed like it was the most important thing. It's a microscope. It takes pictures. It measures things. Okay, makes sense. So I'm going to move that over to the left. I'm going to make it a little bit larger and give the screen a little bit of visual hierarchy. I've also brought over its input fields, which are now to the left of it, and I'm displaying only the basic fields. The advanced stuff I'm going to hide until either the user's action require it or they make some specific request, click, rollover, whatever it is, in order to see the advanced stuff. And then I'm going to take the iconography and navigation that was window specific, right? That stuff is still there. I don't know why it's there, so I'm not going to play with it. But if the window is in focus, right, I'm actually working on that window, then I'm going to show it. If the window is not in focus, then I'm going to hide it. Seems to make a certain amount of sense. Go back one. So if I did this, and we did a usability test, we did a pre and a post, a before and an after, we would see some improvement based on usability. Can you find this thing? Can you do that task, right? Basic usability stuff. What do you think this is? And it's a pretty low bar, right? Aiming just to fix usability stuff is, I mean, it's nothing you're going to command a huge salary for in your lifetime. It's kind of like going into a restaurant and asking the waiter, you know, what do you have in here that's edible? That's not going to make me sick. It's, you know, good. You should have that. Everybody should have that. But it's not really enough. But it's something, right? We could say we improved the usability of this application. I don't know anything, though, about whether or not the application is more useful for somebody, right? It can be entirely, perfectly, 100% usable, but whether it's useful is an entirely separate question. I can have usability without usefulness. I cannot have usefulness without usability. So, the second category, usefulness, is the tension that exists between the person and the application. It's interaction-based. And this is what we UX folks are typically asked to do, right? Figure out how to improve the way that the person interacts with the machine. And we're pretty good at this, or we should be, right? It's kind of our superpower. This is, you know, our reason for being. But to make an application that's useful, I need to understand what the person is trying to do when they interact with the machine, right? Why are they interacting? What is the tasks? Doing that means we have to do our user research. The people who raise their hands, anybody responsible for user research? Yeah, cool. So, right, at this point, we do our user interviews, we do our contextual inquiries, we go out, we sit next to folks as they use it, we say, why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? Right? What's written on this sticky note over here? We try and figure out workflow and processes. All with the goal of understanding how do we change the thing we have to make it more useful for you. It's taken for granted that we're going to make it more usable as we go along, but in this case, right, for purposes of illustration, we'll do it separately. So here, I have done a couple of things. Again, I'm only going to focus on like 3 or so. I notice, after doing my user research, that users don't think in terms of groups of similar functionality. Nobody thinks like that. They think in terms of, I need to do X. In order to do X, I need to do this, 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 and this. So I'm going to take my navigation, and instead of organizing it by functional similarity, now I'm going to organize it by task. For each task, if I select this, then I have the steps, the individual components required to complete that task, which does a couple of nice things for me. One, it creates an interface that matches more directly the user's mental model. It also embeds a system of training in here, right? If I'm a new user, I know if I want to do task 1 that I have to now do these things. Cool, I'll learn to do that and it'll become more automatic. But I have embedded training in this now. I've also included, because I've done user research and know that setting up this microscope in order to take a good picture and take good measurements of that picture is difficult. It's complicated. So I've added a permanent machine setup icon up in the navigation area, and I'm displaying the top 3 most important values, just to pick a number that fit, so that at a glance I can kind of see how the machine is set up. That may not tell me everything I need to know, so if I roll over it, then I can see, okay, here are all of the values, and if I want to go change them, I can click on a value or hit Edit Setup, and it's going to take me to a machine setup detail page or something. The other thing I can help out with here is adding some contextual help. Right, I have help up in the main navigation, but it's kind of broad. You can imagine it probably just brings up a manual of sorts. So I have a little icon over here next to Z controls. And this provides the user with information they need in the context of completing the task, right? If I'm not quite sure what this means or what this section of the application is asking from me, I can click on that. I can display a nice modal window, and it gives me information about the task, about this section within the task. I can present a process flow that shows how this task relates to other tasks that I'm going to do. I can provide videos that show people how to physically manipulate the machine, right? I've also included help with a specific input field. So if I don't know perhaps what that field name means, it could be a complicated term I'm not familiar with. I also may not know what the system is asking me to put into that field, right? I can roll over that and present information there. Cool to have fans. And if this was the extent of what we had done, right? We had fixed some usability issues. We have fixed some usefulness issues. And it seems kind of small just looking at this, but that task of reorganizing functionality into task-based flows for the folks who are UX people is not always simple. And if all we had done was this, we could say, hey, check it out, right? This is what we had before. It's terrible. Or in real life, it's even more terrible. And now we have something like this. It looks better, things are organized better, stuff doesn't overlap, it matches the way people expect the machine to work. And this is exactly what clients ask us to do. It's what they need us to do, and it's what they're satisfied with. But it's not all that we can do. But people have fine careers doing just that, right? Stop there. And you could run 20, 35 years doing that for clients all around the world. They would pay you big money. They would be cheers. You would go home happy. Your users would go home happy. Your clients would be happy. Most of all, if you work for a big company, your boss would be happy. And everything would be great. But it's not all that we can do. Because remember, there is one last area of tension that I'm calling innovation. This area of tension exists between the user and the application as a pair, as a set, and the rest of the information ecosystem. In order to create something that improves people's lives, in order to create something that is innovative, we need to understand how the user application fit within the larger world of information. These sorts of things are the information ecosystem for any application-person combination. Nothing lives in isolation. What is input to the application that you're concerned with will be output perhaps to another application, to another person. There might be documentation, which is the input to the application. How many times have you gone out to study a particular application with the goal of improving it, only to find out that really the problem is the fact that the inputs to this is some crazy Excel spreadsheet over here that people are trying to copy and paste into. So it's important to understand how this center part relates to other devices, other sources of information and documentation, other workflows and processes, other people, other applications, and even the physical environment itself, right? Understanding how this thing that you were hired to fix lives not in isolation but as part of a larger whole is the stuff that drives innovation. It is these areas of tension that allow us to create applications that are more than what our clients and our users and our bosses ask us for. Considering the larger ecosystem within which scientists live, what we found is that what they were asking us for is really only a small portion of what they need. And what they needed was actually much more interesting, much more subtle, and much more detailed than they would have been happy with. By examining the artifacts they leave behind, what they need turns out to be stuff that they don't realize they need. I call them latent requirements. We're used to going out and looking for requirements, but sometimes the requirements that are necessary to create an innovative design are the things that users are unable to tell you about. A short iPhone example, because no presentation is complete without a good iPhone example. Right? Back years ago, people like me walked around with a date planner, a book that I wrote. I have to be here at this time. I had a Walkman that was a cassette player. Later, I got, much more hip, and I had a CD player, and then I had an MP4 player. I had, believe it or not, at one point, a pager. People would carry all of these devices around with them. And if you ask them, you know what, that's a lot of stuff, right? You look like Batman. Can we do something for you? If you ask people, what do you want? They would be like, no, we're fine. This is everything I need. If I didn't have this, I wouldn't carry it around. I wouldn't bother. But in fact, Apple decided that what people needed was a device that allowed them to all these things in one. Nobody asked for it. Nobody wanted it. In fact, at that point, there were cell phones, like the Motorola, the little blue one. I had a couple of those. They were great. They were tiny. Right? That was the movement in cell phone technology. Make it smaller. You had a big brick with an external battery down to this little Motorola. And here was Apple saying, no, you need this big-ass phone. Right? Twice as big as the thing you think you want. You need this. Nobody would have asked for it. Nobody did ask for it. And yet everybody did need it. As soon as they realized, we could have that. Oh, yeah, I want that. Right? That's what we're doing in our design work. The scientists couldn't tell us, we need, this kind of esoteric theoretical thing. We just want it to be faster, stronger, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Make it fewer clicks. Cool, fewer clicks. Yeah, we can do that. What they needed was not something they understood that they needed. So, we can look at the sort of stuff they leave behind. There are also recognized sources of documentation, manuals and videos. There are existing educational programs. All of these things can provide insight into what scientists need, in addition to going out and doing what you should think of as kind of extended contextual inquiry. Move beyond just working with one person and one screen and look at all of those other points of contact. And when you combine all of that, we found that scientists' needs tended to fall into two categories. There were device issues, some of those we knew about already, and then there were experimental issues. And I have this picture up here on purpose because this is a physicist in his lab at the University of Philadelphia, and he is setting up the microscope to prepare for an experiment, right? They have to twiddle some knobs to make sure it's ready to receive whatever the thing they're looking at. And if you notice, he is about 2 meters away from the screen, physically twisting a little bronze knob, which is focusing a laser on the platform where they put the measurement thing, the sample. And he's looking at the screen over here on the desk to know when it's aligned correctly. And the reason it has to be separate is because it's really sensitive to vibration. So it sits on its own little desk in its own little cabinet, hung, honest to God, by bungee cables, which this company sells because they're scientific bungee cables, but they're not. And when they're done with that, then they can go and sit at the desk. So this tells us I have to design for certain tasks to be done at a distance, while other tasks are done right in front of the machine. So in terms of that legibility issue, this then became a concern for us. The other interesting point about this is, since the machine is so expensive, it's oftentimes used by a lot of different people, right? He owned one. He had in his physics lab 6 or 8 other grad students, and they all shared the machine. And in fact, in many universities, multiple professors will chip in to buy a machine that they will all share. So it could be that his 6 or 8 physics students are using the machine, and next door, there's a chemistry lab, and there's 6 or 8 chemistry students who are also sharing the machine. What we found out is the most important thing in this room is not the monitors, the keyboard, the device itself. The most important thing in this room is this blue notebook. Because when they originally designed this, it was physicists designing for physicists. They thought, well, you sit down at the machine, you turn it on, and you start working. There was no sense of user-specific profiles. There was no login process. So everybody who uses this machine, who has to tweak the settings for their own particular experiment, has to write those settings down in this little blue book so that the next person who comes in knows how far the machine is away from its default so that they can go change it back. And then they have to write down their settings. This is the thing that gets drilled into every grad student in these labs. I don't care what you do with the machine. You can break bits, we'll buy new ones. You must write down your settings in the book. Also, there is no real sense of an experienced user for this machine. Yeah, the professor, they use it for their whole career. They might be there for 20, 30, 40 years. Grad students use it for 4, 6, and it's no longer the professor's job to teach new grad students. It is simply whoever the next grad student is, and then they keep passing that down the line. So there is sort of an experience drift. So, you know, I know the professor knows 100%, the grad student knows 50%, he teaches 25% of that to the next grad student, who teaches 10% of that to the next grad student. And the way in which the Keysight, the company, comes in and helps make sure these people don't just kind of wander off into the forest someplace is they send people in every couple of, well, I get once a semester to reteach them how to do all the basic stuff. It's a terrible business model, but they don't know any better. And nobody was asking for this to be changed. Our screen looked like this. This was our landing screen, and we did a couple of things with this. We have recent experiments. Now these are saved by user, so these are the experiments I have done. Down on the bottom, there are templates that my professor can create based on the sort of stuff we study in our lab. They can come with the software now, right? The company can preload some templates down here, all laid out in a familiar form. This should remind somebody of the periodic table. This was, a huge recognition factor for our students. I can roll over one of these things. I'm not quite sure which one of these I want to use. So if I roll over one, I can see the high-level details on the right-hand side. When I select one of these, I go to a screen that shows me the overview. Remember my task-based navigation? We used a task-based navigation. It is a sequential process. It starts on the left and it ends on the right. There are 5 steps. And when I see the details, the high-level version of this experiment, now I can see all of the details within each of the steps to know at a glance, if I'm using this as the template for my next piece of work, what do I need to change? Because it's all there, the images I took, the measurements I made, the settings I tweaked. When I select a particular step, now I have in a big screen, you'll notice some stuff is really large because we are at the step here where I'm looking at it from across the room. So I'm looking at the picture from across the room. I finish that bit, and I walk up close, and I finish the rest of the text input field sitting at the desk. And you'll notice this idea of cards, right? I have step 1 here, but it looks like there's a place for another step and another step and another step. We use this notion of a card metaphor to reinforce the sequential nature of the process, although having the cards here doesn't prevent anybody from moving non-sequentially. If I want to skip from step 1 to step 3B, I can just go and do that. But a nice animation will allow you to shuffle these cards to the side. And in fact, we continued that card metaphor when we were thinking about how to display basic versus advanced functionality. In a search field, there'll be a basic form or Google will have one thing. And then there'll be the word advanced, and I can click on the word advanced, and I'll see more stuff. Since we were already using cards, we decided to keep with that metaphor. In the US, baseball cards are common, and on the front side, I see the player in their current year, right? Some high-level information, name, position, team. But on the back, I see all the details. This is what they did their entire career, the club, the year, all of the statistics. So we decided to use something like that. So if I want to see the advanced form fields related to this screen here, I click on my little rotate tab. That flips the entire tab over to the back, where I now have my basic and my advanced stuff. By addressing the usability issues, the usefulness issues, and the larger information system within which these people are working, we were able to go beyond what they asked us for and create an application that gave them what they needed, even though they didn't realize that they needed it. By doing this, we enabled the scientists to focus on the science rather than fighting the software that stood between them and the work that they needed to do. It is months of training in the previous version, their existing version. It could be 6 months to become proficient at a basic level, which is a long period of time when you're trying to publish or perish and you're only going to be there for 4 years anyway. It does not mean providing all of the system options, all of the information, all of the functionality to all of the people all of the time and hoping that they can somehow sort it out or, God forbid, customize it. If anyone ever suggests to you, well, we'll just, make it all customizable. So the users can create whatever they want. They can open things, close things, and, set up like a dashboard, whatever they want. That is a cop-out. Nobody wants to figure out a complicated piece of software so that they can customize it for themselves, right? What was the UX job on it? Microsoft does exactly that. Microsoft is a terrible software company. They're an engineering company, right? They provide all of the functionality, all of the time to all of the people. They do not care why you are writing that document, who you are, what you're writing it for. And if anybody thinks, oh, well, Microsoft's not that bad, I know how to use Word. You know how to use Word because you've been using it your entire life. And still, I guarantee you, I challenge you now, go next time you open Word, figure out how to insert a table of contents. I dare you.